Alright, here's a story about Big Joe and Little Mo. They bought a tavern together. This is Big Joe and Little Mo. And all of a sudden they had no business, none whatsoever. So he told his partner Mo, he says, we don't have any business. So his partner said, well, I know these guys. Let's see if I can get them and I'll bring them in. So he went out and he left. And he walked down the street a block. He's looking for his friends. He couldn't find anybody. And he goes down the street another block. And he all of a sudden he heard some things going on. So he walked up 4 flights of steps. And he came back to the tavern. He says, hey, Mo, he says, I got these 4 guys. So he brought them in. He says, Mo, he says, I don't know how to thank you. He says, here's $2. So they're all sitting in the bar having a drink. And Mo said to his partner, he says, this is no good. We need some women in this bar. He says, no problem. I'll go out and get you some girls. So he goes out. And he goes down the street looking for some women. He can't find anybody. He goes down the street again. He still can't find anybody. He don't know what he's doing. So all of a sudden he goes down the street and he hears all this racket and everything, and he goes in and he comes back to the tavern and he says, hey, I got these 4 girls, and he brings them in. He says, Jesus, he says, thanks. Mo, he says, here's $2. So now they're sitting there, they got the guys and the girls, but they got no music, no entertainment. He says, I got a good band. I'm going to go out and find them. So he goes out. He goes down the street a block. He's looking. He can't find any of his friends. Goes down the street another block. He still can't find any of his friends. Goes down the street looking. He can't find nobody. He says, man, where am I going to go? He says, I just, I don't know where to go, So he decides, well, okay, I know where to go. So he goes down the street another block and he comes back to the tavern. He says, hey, I brought this band called the 4 J's. He says, thanks, Mo. He says, here's $2. So now business was really kicking up big, and they're kind of running out of change. So he says, Mo, he says, here's a couple of 20s. He says, see if you can get me change. He says, no problem. So he goes out, and then he walks down the street, and he sees this place that's on the 3rd floor. They got a bar up there. He walks up 3 flights of steps, and he comes back to the bar. He says, hey, he says, all I can get you was 4 10s. He says, Mo, he says, that's great. He says, here's $2. He says, where'd you go? He says, well, I had to go to the 648 club. He says, oh, Mo, that's great. He says, you know what? Business is so good, we're running out of booze. You got to go out and get some booze. He says, okay, I'll go out and get you some. So he goes out again. And he goes out, he goes down the street a block, and all of a sudden he hears some joints hopping, and he goes up 3 flights of steps, and he comes back to the tavern again. He says, well, what can you, he says, all I can get you was this stuff 100 proof called 4 Aces. He says, Mo, he says, that's great. He says, here's $5. He says, where'd you go? He says, I went back to the 648 club. He says, I want to tell you something. That's great. He says, how old are you? He says, I'm 65. 65? He says, you don't look a day over 35. He says, you ever married? He says, oh yeah, I've been married for 7 years. I got 4 girls and 3 boys. He says, do you ever do any gambling? Oh yeah, I go down to Club 77 all the time. He says, but one night, this guy drew 4 9s and an 8 for a kicker. And I lost everything to a straight flush.